I'm your host, Jay. Today I'm going to be reading one of my origin stories for a character that I made named Sinard. I don't know if this is going to be entirely this episode or if I might break it up into a couple. We'll see, but I should probably begin. Before we begin, you must first know our history. We live on the planet Yggdrasil. It's named this after the World Tree, which is said to be the birthplace of all life. But the world we live on has gone by many names, like Tellus or Gaia, but one of its most notable names was Earth. The wolf and dragon species are called the last ones for a reason. Our history books say that we evolved to what we are today. The real story has been lost to time. The people before us were these fleshy beings with no fur or scales. We have a name for them. We call them Chandra, which means soft skin. The real reason they disappeared was because of something called a shadow demon. It's a demon that possesses no form of its own, but when people are born, it will inhabit them, growing stronger each time that it is born inside of someone until finally it gains enough strength to break free and manifest its true form. Then it burns the world, wiping everything that it can off the face of the earth in the short amount of time that it has, destroying many species. Then after it's gone, the cycle starts again. Another species becomes dominant. Over many lifetimes, the shadow demon grows stronger, and it destroys the next. Except after the Chandra, the cycle restarted, but after about 200 years, it suddenly disappeared, and then people started to forget about it. Its markings hadn't been seen on any living creature in over 600 years. So finally, it just became an urban legend, and a new history was written over the old one to help hide it. The dragon and wolf species lived in harmony for a long time. Wolves don't really have any form of government, while the dragons live with a royal system, where queens hold more power than kings and women are valued as warriors. The two species used to live together in harmony until they started to accuse each other of breaking each other's laws. And then the war started. It's called the Great Species War. Along with some other names, it lasted a long time, and after the war, the species never really fully recovered, and hate still existed between each other. The war ended when a wolf military general had a child with one of the most powerful dragon queens. Both people were exiled, and the shadow demon suddenly appeared in their child. How? That is a question that we ask a lot. How do we do this? How did this happen? How did we not notice this? It's also a question that I ask myself a lot, but my question is a lot harder to answer. How do I survive the demon that is inside of me? How do I win the war that rages on inside my body? How? Now that is a very good question, and I don't have the answer. My name is Sinard, but my mom calls me Shadow. There are a few things you must know about me. I'm half wolf from my father's side, and I'm half dragon from my mother's side. I walk in 2 legs and have 5-fingered hands. I'm covered in fur except for my wings, which have blood red scales. I can speak both English and Draconic. My fur is a dark gray, almost black, but with blood red demon markings. But most importantly, I shouldn't even have been born. My mother was a queen, but she was exiled for having a child with my father, an exiled wolf. So we live in the middle of nowhere, on the territory between the Dragonlands and the Wolflands. As a child, I was very smart and adept. My mother taught me how to do housework and proper hygiene, as well as do math and other curricular activities and knowledge. My dad taught me how to survive and protect myself. The day I turned 12, my dad was shot right on our doorstep, and that's when the first incident happened. It's October 3rd, 2067, when I'm woken up at 4 in the morning by shouting. So I get up, and it took me a second to realize that one of the voices that's shouting is my father's. So I head to the front door, and the second I open it, I realize that something's wrong. The two guys standing over my father both wear the hunter's sigil. They are from the most elite hunting gang around. But then something weird happens. They both look up when the door opens, but they just seem to stare right through me. Like they can't even see me. Like I know it's dark and I blend in, but it's still not that dark. After a couple of seconds, they look back at my father, realize he's covered in blood on the ground. And before I can even blink, one of the bounty hunters pulls out a gun and fires, and everything turns black, just as the sound from the gun firing reaches my ears. I don't remember much, but I do remember this. My markings began to burn like they were on fire. Impenetrable darkness surrounded everything. Then the next thing I know, there's a blood-curdling scream that rips through the air, and then silence. No sounds of movement. It's like the whole forest has gone quiet. Then as quickly as it came, the darkness disappears, and it's only my dad dying on the ground. The two bounty hunters are gone. It's like they never existed at all. After I recovered from the shock of what had just happened, I picked up my father up and carried him inside and brought him to my mother, where she tried to heal him. She couldn't, so he died on our kitchen table with my present from him clutched in my hands. Next thing I knew, I was out the door, flying off, with tears streaming down my face. I don't know how far I flew that night, but I also don't really care. All I know is that by morning, I was somewhere near my father's original home in the town of Dway, where I collapsed and fell asleep in an alleyway between two homes. I slept for 36 hours. When I next woke up, it was evening, probably around 6 o'clock, and I heard screaming. A group of boys was surrounding a girl in the alleyway where I had been sleeping. The scream had come from the girl, so I got up and walked over to the group and told them to leave her alone. Well, I guess they didn't like that because one of the boys didn't like that because he tried to punch me. Keyword, tried. Next thing I know, my markings flare in burning pain. Everything goes black. This time it's different. It's almost like my body isn't mine because I can tell that it's completely dark, but I can see. Then I start to move, but it's not me moving, it's somebody else. It's like being behind somebody else's eyes. My body runs up, touches each person, and they disappear. Then as I touch the last person, I disappear with them and reappear on the opposite side, except that it's the same side, except everything is made out of shadows. And that's where the fight really begins. I run inside of the first person's guard and I bite his neck, ripping his throat out, and a scream dies before it can even begin. And then I'm on the next one, and I touch him, and he erupts in flames. His screams are loud and painful, but all I want is more screaming and more blood. It's a feeling that I've never felt before, a feeling that's not mine, a lust for blood and destruction. The next two guys I grab and bash their heads together so hard that I shatter their skulls, and they fall limp to the ground. That leaves the last one, the group leader, and I know how I'm going to hurt him. I grab him by the neck, shove a burning hand into his chest. After a couple seconds, the smell of burning fur and flesh reaches my nose. It's a smell I completely savor in that moment. Then he screams. Next thing I know, I'm holding his heart, and his body is on the ground with a burned hole in his chest where I ripped his heart out. I squeeze it, and it explodes with a satisfying popping sound, and then I'm back on the surface, covered in blood and gore, standing in front of a beautiful girl. I collapse, unable to take anything more. The next thing I know, I'm in a house. Not my house, but somebody else's house. When I wake up, it takes a minute for my brain to start working, and for all the cobwebs to sort themselves out. the first thing that I realize is the smell. It smells like freshly cooked food and a faint scent of feminine perfume. Next, I realize that I can hear people moving. I identify three people. I hear the voice of a male, and by its gruff tone, it's probably somebody in their mid-30s, along with the sound of a female. And by her voice, I would guess that she's also in her early to mid-30s. The third person I'm less certain of. I can't tell anything by their movements because they aren't moving that much and they haven't said a word since I woke up. I open my eyes and sit up. That's when I finally realize how sore I am. As I sit up, every muscle in my body screams with protest, making my movements stiff and uncoordinated. I have to catch myself on the bed I'm lying on as I get up to keep myself from falling over. Then a gentle arm wraps around my waist to help support me as I stand up. When I turn my head around to look at the person who's helping me, my eyes land on the most beautiful person I've ever seen. It's the girl that I rescued in the alleyway. When she sees me looking at her, she smiles and helps guide me to a rolling chair next to a desk opposite the bed. Helping me sit down, I work up the courage to ask my first question. What's your name? My name? Well, my birth name is Strile, but my friends call me Diamond or Dia for short. I get it, because Strile is draconic for diamond, right? Yep, my parents chose it because they wanted to have a child with a draconic name, so that at least they might have something kind of draconic, seeing as since the war, dragons refused to even accept the thought that we could coexist. I hear you there. My mother was once the draconic queen, but when she had me, she was exiled. Wait, your mother can't be Shelia, can she? And your father totally isn't Finn, the old general, right? Actually, they are. I'm their son, Sinner. But my mom calls me Shadow, and well, my dad, was, was. Suddenly, everything hits me. My father was dead, and I would never see him again. No more late night runs out in the wild. No more defense lessons. No more stories from his travel. I would never see him again. Next thing I know, she's got me in a tight hug as tears stream down my face, as my world as I know it crashes around me. After a while, when the tears stop coming and I manage to regain control of myself, she tells me that she understands. We sit there for hours talking. I tell her what it's like to be the son of the exiled queen, and she tells me how her and her parents support her, even if she doesn't know it yet. Then we finally broach the subject that's been plaguing both our minds, the night in the alleyway. I learned that that incident happened 2 nights ago. I'd been out cold for a straight 48 hours. She tells me that from what she saw, I came out of nowhere, told the guys to leave her alone, and then as close as one came to punch me, everything turned black, and all that could be heard were screams. When the darkness left, I was lying on the ground, covered in blood and dying from dehydration, as well as some vicious burns on my body. Apparently, she carried me all the way to our home. She put me on her bed and proceeded to take care of me, treating my burns, helping rehydrate me while I was out. Also, according to her, during that whole time, I never moved and they could never find my pulse. And apparently, until a few hours ago, I wasn't even breathing until I woke up. I tell her what I remember about the fight, which sadly isn't much. All I remember was telling the guys to leave her alone, then a weird feeling, almost like an unfathomable hunger. But for what I can remember, after talking about that, she hands me a book and tells me that it was clutched tight in my hands when she saw me on the ground. It's the book that my dad had for me. That's when I remember my birthday was only 2 days ago, and that I was unconscious almost the whole time. Suddenly, a voice calls up, saying it's dinner time. At that exact moment, my stomach rumbles loudly in hunger. I watch Dia laugh as she helps me up, and we start heading down to dinner. On our way down, I realized that this will be my first time ever eating over at another girl's house, and that thought makes me smile.